Commander Sarah Chen stands in the observation deck of the Meridian, a deep space research vessel, watching the distant stars with the wariness of someone who has spent 3 years away from Earth. She is 42 years old, a decorated astronaut and xenobiologist who volunteered for this mission, specifically to escape a life that had become suffocating after the loss of her daughter to illness 5 years prior. Her cabin is sparse, decorated only with photographs of nebulae and distant worlds, places she could study without the weight of personal memory. The images on her walls represent a conscious choice: beauty without human attachment, wonder without emotional entanglement. Sarah has built a reputation as cold, efficient, and brilliant, the kind of scientist who prioritizes data over sentiment. Her crew respects her but rarely befriends her, sensing the invisible barrier she maintains between herself and genuine human connection. The Meridian is on a routine survey mission near the Kepler 442 system, cataloging atmospheric composition and geological formations of nearby planets. The mission is mundane, predictable, and exactly what Sarah needs, or so she thought. The repetition of data collection, the mechanical precision of scientific inquiry, the emotional distance of numbers and measurements have become her armor against grief. She has been tracking unusual electromagnetic signatures on a nearby moon for the past week, anomalies that don't match any known natural phenomena. The data appears on her screens like whispers from something she can't quite understand, and for the first time in 5 years, Sarah feels genuinely curious about something outside her immediate sphere of control. Against the advice of her more cautious chief science officer, Dr. Marcus Webb, a man who has worked with Sarah for 2 years and still barely knows her, Sarah authorizes a closer scan, hoping to publish a paper that might finally justify the 3 years of personal sacrifice. Webb is a methodical researcher in his 60s, the sort of person who has learned through decades of experience that rushing into the unknown often leads to complications. He expresses his concerns quietly, respectfully, but with the firmness of someone who has seen missions go wrong. "Commander, we should wait for Earth Command's guidance on anomalies of this magnitude," he suggests, but Sarah waves away his concerns. Earth Command's response won't arrive for 8 months due to the distance. The discovery is too significant, too urgent. The electromagnetic signatures are too strange. The data from the closer scan reveals something impossible: organic life signs emanating from beneath the moon's crystalline surface, but the thermal readings suggest the moon's interior should be inhospitable to any known form of life. The temperature fluctuations are dramatic, the atmospheric composition chaotic. The electromagnetic signatures continue, pulsing with a rhythm that almost seems deliberate, almost seems like communication. Sarah's hands shake slightly as she reviews the data. This is not the incremental discovery of microbes or fossilized remains. This is the signature of complex life, possibly intelligent life, existing in conditions that violate every principle she thought she understood about extraterrestrial habitability. Sarah's discovery captivates her in a way nothing has since her daughter's death. The possibility of finding extraterrestrial intelligent life consumes her thoughts as she works late into ship's cycles, running simulations and checking calculations obsessively. She begins planning an expedition, aware that the protocol requires her to report back to Earth Command and wait for further instructions. However, the pragmatic part of her mind calculates that Earth Command's response won't arrive for 8 months due to the distance. The discovery is too significant, too urgent, to wait. She convinces the mission committee aboard the Meridian, a body consisting of senior officers and scientists, to authorize a preliminary landing with a small team of 5. Herself, Dr. Webb, 2 security officers named Lieutenant Marcus Torres and Sign David Kim, and Dr. Amelia Foster, the ship's exobiology specialist. Sarah frames this as scientific due diligence rather than impulsive action, emphasizing the time-critical nature of gathering initial data before the electromagnetic signatures change or fade. But internally, she recognizes her own recklessness. She tells herself it's for science. She doesn't admit, even to herself, that it's because she finally feels alive again, that pursuing the unknown has awakened something in her that grief had buried. The inciting incident approaches as the small team prepares to descend. Sarah reviews the mission parameters obsessively, checking and rechecking equipment, running through contingency protocols. She finds herself unable to sleep, her mind racing through possibilities and potential complications. In her quiet quarters the night before the landing, she finds herself holding the photograph of her daughter Emma, age 8, forever 8, with her father's eyes and Sarah's stubborn chin. Sarah rarely allows herself to do this anymore. The photograph is kept in the darkest corner of her personal effects, a relic of a life she's spent 3 years trying to escape rather than process. She wonders what Emma might have become, dreams she might have pursued, what kind of woman she might have grown into. The thought spirals toward pain before Sarah forces it away. Focus on the mission, she tells herself. Focus on what you can control. Focus on what doesn't remind you of everything you've lost. But something shifts that night. As Sarah falls asleep holding the photograph, she dreams not of Emma's final days, but her earliest memories. Emma, at 3 years old, looking up at the night sky and asking her mother if the stars were made of the same stuff as people. Sarah had laughed and explained atoms, molecules, the universal composition of matter. Emma had frowned thoughtfully and asked again, "But are the stars, Alami? Can they feel things?" Sarah had said no, of course, stars were just massive balls of burning hydrogen. But Emma had persisted with the illogic of childhood. Maybe we just can't feel how they feel. When Sarah wakes, her face is wet with tears, and she realizes something essential has shifted. The mission ahead is no longer just about running away from grief. Something deeper has opened up inside her, some dormant part of her capacity for connection and wonder that Emma's memory has reawakened. The landing goes smoothly, too smoothly. The crystalline surface of the moon is breathtakingly beautiful, refracting the light of the distant star into 1,000 prismatic colors that create an almost otherworldly landscape. The team moves cautiously through a narrow ravine where Sarah's sensors indicate the strongest life signatures originate. The ravine walls rise dramatically on either side, creating a natural pathway that almost seems carved for travelers. The air is thin but breathable, a fact that sends ripples of excitement through the team. Lieutenant Torres, the security chief, maintains constant alertness, scanning for thermal signatures and potential threats. But the landscape remains peaceful, almost inviting. An atmosphere this hospitable shouldn't exist on a moon this size. It violates known physics. And Sarah feels the thrill of scientific mystery mingling with something that might be called awe. As they descend deeper into the ravine, the walls show unmistakable signs of artificial modification. The crystals are arranged in patterns too regular to be natural, their surfaces smoothed and shaped by intentional craftsmanship. Sarah photographs everything, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Ensign Kim whistles softly, a sound of wonder that breaks the tense silence. "This is incredible, Commander," he says, and Sarah nods, unable to find words adequate to the moment. When they reach the mouth of a vast cavern, Sarah's breath catches so forcefully that, for a moment, she cannot breathe. The cavern floor is illuminated by bioluminescent organisms that paint the underground world in shades of blue and violet, casting everything in an ethereal glow. Scattered throughout are structures, dwellings, perhaps, carved from the crystal itself with artistic precision. Some rise like spires, others are low and integrated into the landscape, and everywhere there are details. Intricate patterns, openings that might be windows or doors, networks of crystalline tubes that might serve as aqueducts or communication systems. This is not merely a settlement. This is a civilization. Sarah's analytical mind attempts to function, to catalog observations and record data, but her emotional mind has taken over. This is intelligence. This is society. This is everything she came into space hoping to find but never truly believed she would actually encounter. She activates the full recording suite on her suit systems, knowing that every detail captured here will rewrite human understanding of the universe. The first encounter with the aliens happens without warning, though later Sarah will wonder if it was actually without warning, if the inhabitants of this place had been watching the humans descend and had simply waited for the right moment to reveal themselves. A figure emerges from the shadows between buildings, humanoid in general shape but distinctly alien. The creature is approximately 6 feet tall, with elongated limbs that move with an almost fluid grace. Its skin shifts between silver and deep purple hues as it moves, colors flowing across its surface as though emotions or thought being painted directly onto its flesh. Its face is striking large, expressive eyes that glow faintly in the cavern light, containing depths that Sarah finds almost impossible to look at directly. The mouth is not quite a mouth, it opens to reveal not teeth, but what appears to be a complex sensory organ, perhaps used for tasting or smelling the air. The alien does not attack. Instead, it makes a series of harmonic sounds, a language composed of tones rather than phonetic words. The sounds are genuinely beautiful music and meaning woven together in a way that seems to violate the human understanding of what language should be. Lieutenant Torres moves his weapon, but Sarah signals him sharply to stand down. "We come in peace," she says, knowing the words are almost certainly useless. The alien couldn't possibly understand English. Feeling compelled to speak them anyway, feeling the ancient human need to announce peaceful intentions before proceeding. The alien tilts its head, studying her with those luminous eyes that seem to contain all the color of the cavern around them. For a long moment, nothing happens. Then, from behind the first alien, another figure emerges, a smaller version of the species, not a child exactly but clearly younger, in the same way that a young humanoid might appear. The proportions are more delicate, the colors less complex, but the intelligence in its eyes is unmistakable. Sarah's throat tightens unexpectedly, and she realizes with a shock that she's thinking of Emma, of the loss of youth, of the crushing unfairness of a child's death. More aliens emerge from the settlement, perhaps a dozen in total, and the security officers tense visibly, hands drifting toward their weapons. Sarah signals them to standness that leaves no room for argument. "These are sapient beings," she says quietly. "We will conduct ourselves with respect and dignity, or we will not conduct ourselves here at all." The aliens seem to sense her authority and her lack of threat. They make more of their harmonic sounds, and gradually, the tension decreases. What follows over the next hours is a careful, halting exchange of information through a combination of gesture, sound patterns, and eventually Sarah and Dr. Foster attempting to decode the aliens' language using linguistic principles that might be applied to any communication system. Dr. Foster, a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and a methodical mind, begins working with the aliens to establish basic vocabulary. She points at objects and listens carefully to the harmonic sounds the aliens make, attempting to find patterns, looking for repetition. Through this process of painstaking linguistic archaeology, they learn that the aliens call themselves the Thal. They are not hostile, but they are clearly fearful, fear expressed through colors that shift rapidly across their skin and through a certain quality in their harmonic vocalizations. Their world, they communicate through fragmentary exchanges and gesture, is dying. Dr. Webb relays the information to the Meridian, and within hours, the situation escalates dramatically. The moon's stability is compromised, not by natural causes, by what appears to be seismic disturbances caused by an ancient geological fault line shifting due to tidal forces from nearby planets aligned in a particular configuration. The Thal's moon, it seems, was always destined for this moment. It was built into the celestial mechanics millions of years ago. The Thal's moon is in the early stages of a catastrophic collapse that will render it uninhabitable within a matter of weeks. The communications officer aboard the Meridian, Lieutenant James Cho, patches through a message from Captain Okonkwo. Sarah and her team have 72 hours to return to the ship before they must evacuate the system. The geological projections are clear and mathematically certain. This is not a speculation, but an equation solved to multiple decimal places. This is not a prophecy, but a fact. The moon will die. Sarah sits with the Thal in the cavern, watching bioluminescence paint their fear across their skin in waves of darker colors. She shares this information with them through the rudimentary language they've developed, watching as they absorb what it means. Their entire civilization, thousands of years of history and culture, will be erased. In the time it takes for their star to circle around their planet a dozen times, everything they have built, everything they have created, will cease to exist. The Thal possess no spacecraft, no technology for space travel. They are, in many ways, a pre-industrial society, a civilization that seems to have evolved entirely around existence in stable underground communities. The idea of leaving their world is not just migration. It is the extinction of everything they are, the end of a culture that likely extends back tens of thousands of years. The Thal mother of the younger alien approaches Sarah directly. through the rudimentary language they've developed. A combination of harmonic sounds that Sarah is learning to approximate. She communicates something that Sarah finds both heartbreaking and frustrating. She asks if there is space aboard the human vessel. Not for all the Thal, she seems to understand the impossibility through some instinctive grasp of scale and proportion, but for some, for her young one at least, for the next generation, the question lands like a weight on Sarah's chest. She knows the answer before she even checks the ship's specifications, because she knows the margins of safety are always calculated, always bounded by physics and engineering, and the primary responsibility to crew. Back aboard the Meridian, the situation becomes a nightmare of bureaucracy and ethics that Sarah finds herself navigating with increasing desperation. Captain Okonkwo, a decorated military officer in his 60s with gray at his temples and a bearing that speaks of decades of command decisions, immediately convenes an emergency meeting with Sarah and the senior staff in the ship's conference room. The atmosphere is tense, professional, but Sarah can feel the weight of the impossible choice hanging over everyone present. The ship's lifeboat capacity is limited, designed for emergency evacuation of the crew in the event of catastrophic systems failure. There is emergency seating for exactly 48 individuals, but the seating is designed for human physiology, calibrated to human body structures and the specific G-forces that human bodies can safely tolerate during launch and acceleration. The Thal, where different skeletal structure and body mass distribution would require modified seating to survive the G-forces of launch and escape velocity. Captain Okonkwo's chief engineer, Yuki Tanaka, a brilliant woman in her 50s, with a reputation for solving impossible problems, estimates that they could retrofit accommodations for perhaps a dozen Thal at most, a process that would consume at least 20 hours of intensive engineering work. 20 hours that the team can spare perhaps, but only by cutting into other critical systems maintenance that is scheduled to occur during the return journey. It's a calculation of risk, a balance sheet of safety margins. Captain Okonkwo's position is unbendable from the beginning. The Meridian has a moral obligation to its crew first. The mission charter is explicit, and unambiguous exploration and scientific discovery are secondary to the safety of personnel. The words are printed in the official documentation, have been signed off on by corporate lawyers and government officials, are defended by insurance protocols and liability frameworks. They can offer to take some Thal aboard, but only if it doesn't compromise crew safety or the ship's ability to achieve orbit and return to Earth. The retrofitting of the lifeboat becomes the central constraint, the physical limitation that transforms the debate into mathematics. Sarah finds herself in the role of advocate, pushing back against protocols she once would have defended instinctively. She argues that refusing aid to an entire civilization on the brink of extinction violates the principles that space exploration was meant to represent, that sending humans into the cosmos should mean more than just collecting samples and filing reports. We came to space because we wanted to know if we were alone, Sarah argues in the conference room, her voice tight with emotion she can barely contain. We came because there's something in human nature that seeks out connection, that wants to reach toward the unknown and make meaning from what we find. And now that we've found something, intelligence, culture, consciousness, we want to hide behind bureaucracy? We want to tell ourselves that our hands are tied by specifications and safety margins? Dr. Webb responds, his voice measured but firm. Commander, I understand the emotional weight of this situation, but we cannot allow sentiment to override safety protocols. The crew signed on to this mission with certain expectations about their probability of survival. We have an obligation to honor that. The crew signed on to be explorers, Sarah counters, not to be accountants of human suffering. Dr. Foster becomes her unexpected ally in these meetings. The exobiologist, typically mild-mannered and deferential, becomes passionate in the discussions, her voice rising with uncharacteristic intensity. We are their ancestors from across the stars, she argues, her hands gesturing emphatically. We arrived with technology they can only dream of, and we have the power to save them, even if we can't save all of them. That power carries weight. That power carries obligation. We cannot be a species that encounters intelligent life and then calculates what portion of that life is worth saving based on the available square footage in a lifeboat. Others aboard the ship push back with legitimate concerns. Security Chief Lieutenant Marcus Torres argues that taking aliens aboard without full understanding of their biology or potential threat is reckless. He has studied security protocols for first contact scenarios, and he knows the theoretical risks. We don't know if they might carry pathogens that could devastate the crew. We don't know if their behavioral patterns might become unpredictable in the confined environment of the ship. And frankly, Commander, we don't know if we can trust them. The words are spoken professionally, but Sarah can hear the fear beneath them, the fear of the unknown, which is always rational in its own way. The ship's medical officer, Dr. Patel, a woman with kind eyes and a cautious demeanor, points out that they don't understand thal physiology well enough to ensure their survival in the ship's environment. We've done basic scans, but 3 years isn't nearly enough time to fully understand alien species' medical requirements. If a thal becomes critically ill and we don't know how to treat them, we could lose them. More than that, we'd lose crew members while trying to help them. The concern is pragmatic and scientifically sound, but Sarah feels it like an accusation and assumption that the thal lives are somehow worth less than the potential complications. Some crew members begin to voice concerns about resource allocation in the common areas: water recycling systems, food synthesis, oxygen production. If the Meridian carries additional passengers, the ship's consumables will decrease. The margins are already tight for a 3-year return journey, with calculations built in for normal contingencies, but little room for major systems failures or unexpected emergencies. Lieutenant Cho, the communications officer, presents detailed projections. If they add 12 thal to the crew, they lose approximately 8% of their safety margin for water, 15% for oxygen production redundancy, and 10% for food synthesis capacity. These are not insignificant losses. Sarah descends into a depression, reminds her painfully of the years following her daughter's death. Those were years where she couldn't quite remember what it felt like to be present in her own life, where every moment felt filtered through a gray haze of disconnection. She finds herself staring at photographs of the thal young one for hours at a time, reviewing the footage she captured in the cavern. The young alien's eyes contain an entire world of potential, and Sarah cannot escape the haunting similarity to how Emma looked in the months before the illness, her final turn eyes bright with consciousness and intelligence, completely unaware that time was running out, that the future being promised would never come. She begins working obsessively on solutions, barely sleeping, consuming nutrients mechanically without tasting them. She calculates, recalculates, and argues with the engineering team about ways to compress lifeboat capacity, to squeeze more people into the available space, to solve the impossible equation of finite resources and infinite need. She runs simulations or she reduces crew rations slightly, imagining the accumulation of those small reductions across 3 years. She calculates how much water could be saved if the shower allocations were reduced, if food waste was minimized to absolute levels, if oxygen recyclers operated at slightly higher efficiency. It's the math of desperation trying to find fractions of percentages that might add up to one more life saved. Dr. Webb, maintaining his position as voice of caution and scientific reason, becomes increasingly concerned about Sarah's mental state. The man watches her working through the night, sees the dark circles under her eyes becoming deeper, notices that she's lost weight and that her hands sometimes shake when she reaches for her coffee. In a private conversation in her quarters, he tells her with genuine concern in his voice, "Commander, I think you're being compromised by emotion. I think you're projecting your grief onto that alien child in a way that clouds your professional judgment. It's understandable, it's human. But it's also dangerous, not just for you, but for the crew that depends on your leadership to make rational decisions." Sarah nearly strikes him for the observation, actually raising before she catches herself and forces it down. The moment of violence potential is shocking to her, revealing how close she is to losing control. She excuses herself and returns to her cabin, where she cries for the first time in 5 years, overwhelmed by the weight of impossible choices. She sits on the edge of her bunk and holds Emma's photograph to her chest, and she sobs with a ferocity that frightens her, sobs that seem to contain not just current grief, but all the grief she's been refusing to process for 5 years, all the rage at a universe that would take a child, all of the despair at her inability to save anyone, to change anything, to make meaning from senseless loss. A breakthrough comes from an unexpected source the following morning. Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka, a woman Sarah has never been particularly close to. Their interactions have been limited. Professional updates and technical discussions approaches her in the engineering bay with a proposal that she's been working on through the night. Tanaka hasn't slept either, Sarah realizes, but there's an energized quality to her exhaustion, the look of someone who's found a solution and is eager to share it. The Meridian isn't just an exploration vessel, it's partially equipped as a mobile research facility. The secondary laboratory on Deck C was designed to be a flexible space, capable of being reconfigured for different types of research as needed. Tanaka presents detailed calculations showing that by temporarily converting the laboratory into additional emergency shelter with portable life support systems that can be extracted from other non-critical systems, the team could theoretically accommodate 30,000 passengers instead of 12. It's an elegant solution, but it requires sacrifice. The laboratory equipment, scientific instruments worth millions of credits, technology that took years to develop would have to be stored, possibly damaged in the process. The ship's ability to conduct research during the return journey would be severely compromised. The research mission that Sarah came on this journey to pursue would be essentially abandoned. The proposal creates new tensions within the command structure. Sarah goes to Captain Okonkwo with the plan, but the captain remains skeptical. He's a practical man, not cruel but realistic about the constraints of physics and logistics. This isn't about capacity anymore, it's about resource calculations at a deeper level. Okonkwo runs his own projections with the help of Tanaka and Cho, and he finds that the math barely works. It's not that it's impossible, it's that it's technically feasible only by accepting margins that make Okonkwo deeply uncomfortable. 30 additional passengers, 30 additional people consuming water, food, oxygen, and energy resources that were calculated for a crew of 62. The projections suggest they could manage it, but only by implementing strict rationing, only by assuming no emergencies or system failures during the return journey, only by maintaining perfect efficiency in systems that were designed with some redundancy specifically to handle failures gracefully. If our water recyclers fail, Okonkwo tells Sarah in his ready room, his voice grave, we could be looking at dehydration for the crew within weeks. If our production systems have any kind of malfunction, we don't have backup capacity to keep everyone alive while repairs are made. We're talking about operating with essentially zero safety margin. That's not uncomfortable, Sarah. That's potentially unconscionable. The situation forces Sarah to confront a deeper moral question that she's been avoiding. If they take 30,000, they increase the risk to the human crew. The margins become tighter, the system more fragile. A failed water recycler, a medical emergency, a navigation error, due to human fatigue, any of these could become catastrophic with limited resources. Is it ethical to accept even a marginally increased risk to the crew's survival in order to save aliens? Sarah finds herself on the opposite side of arguments she'd made a decade earlier, when she supported cutting resources to a colonial outpost to save money for corporate headquarters. Back then, the equations had felt simple, now they feel impossible. Word of the proposal spreads through the crew, and opinion fractures immediately. Some crew members, particularly the younger personnel who've grown up with science fiction narratives of human unity and cooperation, volunteer to reduce their own resource consumption to make room for thou passengers. They sign formal statements saying they accept reduced rations, shorter showers, and decreased oxygen allocations. The gesture is moving, but also troubling. Sarah recognizes that they're making choices based on idealism rather than full understanding of what those choices might mean over the course of a 3-year journey. Others file formal objections with Captain Okonkwo, arguing that this violates crew safety protocols and represents a deviation from the original mission parameters that exceeds the captain's authority to approve. A group of senior engineers write a letter expressing concern that the modifications to the lifeboat might compromise its structural integrity in ways that current analysis hasn't identified. The ship becomes divided, with tension growing between the engineers and scientists, between those who see the THAL as a scientific opportunity and those who see them as a liability. The THAL themselves become caught in human indecision. Sarah must communicate to the Thal mother, whose name translates roughly as she who remembers the first song, that they might be able to save some of her people, but the details remain uncertain. The conversation happens in the cavern, with Dr. Foster present as translator, and it's one of the most difficult exchanges of Sarah's life. The alien woman, with those luminous eyes that seem to hold the weight of worlds, listens as Sarah explains the constraints. She who remembers the first song doesn't seem to understand how humans can have such power and hesitate to use it. In her culture, apparently, the concept of abundance combined with refusal is almost incomprehensible. In a conversation mediated by Dr. Foster's increasingly sophisticated translation protocols, the Thal mother tells Sarah a story about the ancient history of her people. The Thal once had a choice to expand their civilization outward, to risk the dangers of the void between worlds, to develop spacecraft and venture into the cosmos. They chose instead to contract inward, to deepen their roots in their moon, to create perfect underground ecosystems and develop art and philosophy rather than technology. That choice led to the creation of their beautiful civilization, a culture of unparalleled beauty and spiritual depth, but it also led to their vulnerability. Now at the end, the Thal face another choice, and it is being made not by the Thal themselves, but by humans they've just met. Your kind chooses. She who remembers the first song sings through the translator, and that choice is our destiny. Will you choose to save us, or will you choose to save yourselves? The words contain no accusation, but Sarah hears judgment in them anyway. The judgment of history, perhaps, or the judgment of the universe itself. The geological surveys accelerate the timeline dramatically. New seismic data reveals the moon's collapse is progressing faster than initial estimates suggested. What was thought to be 3 weeks has become, perhaps, 10 days. The interior of the moon is fracturing, and the process is accelerating with a mathematical inevitability. Captain Okonkwo calls an all-hands meeting and announces his decision. They will attempt to evacuate 30 Thal passengers. The lab will be converted. Resources will be reallocated. Strict rationing protocols will be implemented. The margins will be tighter than Okonkwo is comfortable with, but they will do this thing. We are explorers, he tells the crew, and explorers take calculated risks. Dr. Tanaka and her engineering team work around the clock to implement the modifications. They disconnect scientific instruments with kind of surgical precision, carefully preserving what they can, but understanding that much of the equipment will have to be sacrificed. The secondary laboratory transforms from a research space into something resembling barracks, with converted seating designed to accommodate Thal physiology. Environmental systems are redirected, creating new zones with modified atmospheric conditions and temperature controls calibrated to what little the humans have learned about Thal physiology. It's barely completed, a patchwork solution that works on paper but feels fragile in practice. The Thal must be selected, and Sarah volunteers to participate in that selection process, a task she immediately regrets accepting. She sits with the Thal elders in the cavern settlement, attempting to explain the numbers through Dr. Foster's increasingly sophisticated translation protocols. 30 survivors out of what she estimates to be approximately 1,000 Thal currently living on the moon. The mathematics of extinction is laid bare in the harmonic language. The Thal must choose which 30 of their people will leave to become the seed population of their species in the wider universe. In human terms, it would be like selecting 30 people from all of Earth's population to continue the species, an unbearable choice that no human council would ever want to make. The Thal approach it differently than Sarah expected, revealing something profound about their values and priorities. They don't prioritize the young or the strong, though they do select some young ones. Instead, they select carefully and thoughtfully. Young individuals, yes, but accompanied by elders who carry historical and cultural knowledge. They select artisans and healers, engineers and scientists. They include a musician, a historian, an agricultural specialist. The Thal are attempting to preserve not just their genetic material, but their cultural identity, attempting to carry forward the essence of what makes them Thal, not just their DNA. Sarah watches this process unfold and feels something break open inside her. Recognition that even in crisis, what people choose to save reveals what they truly value. She thinks about Emma, about what would have been lost if Emma's life had been cut short before those memories, before Emma had learned to read and think and dream. She thinks about the weight of cultural memory, about how civilizations are more than just biology, they're the accumulated wisdom and beauty of their people. The Thal mother makes an unexpected request that changes everything. She asks to bring one additional elder, a blind Thal who is keeper of the oral histories, who carries in his memory the stories and songs of his people going back thousands of years. This would push the passenger count to 31, exceeding Captain Okonkwo's limit. The additional passenger would consume resources, would reduce safety margins by another precious percentage point. Sarah finds herself facing the climactic moral crisis of the story. She can refuse, maintaining order, and the precise calculations that mean everyone aboard the Meridian survives with acceptable margins. The decision would be defensible. It would be reasonable. She can push for one more seat, one more risk, one more uncertainty. She goes to Captain Okonkwo with the request, knowing intellectually that it will be denied. But this time, Okonkwo surprises her. He has been reviewing the resource calculations with his chief science officer and chief engineer, and they've identified small inefficiencies in power consumption that have accumulated over the years of operation. A more efficient algorithm for oxygen recycling, a slightly more optimized heating schedule, a reduction in non-critical power usage that could create room for one additional passenger. It's not much, it decreases their safety margin by perhaps 2%, bringing them down to what feels like a razor-thin margin of safety. The margins. Okonkwo's face is grave when he authorizes the 31st seat. His jaw is tight, and Sarah can see the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. "This decision will haunt me," he tells Sarah in a voice that sounds older than it did before. "If anything goes wrong on the return journey, if we face any kind of significant emergency, I will carry responsibility for the decisions made in this moment. I hope you understand that. I hope you understand what you're asking me to do." "I do," Sarah says, and she means it completely. The final week before evacuation is frantic with preparation that borders on chaos. Sarah oversees the modification of the lifeboat while simultaneously working with Dr. Foster to prepare the Thal for life aboard the human vessel. Language training accelerates to intensive levels. The Thal must learn enough human communication to integrate with the crew, to understand emergency procedures, to function in the human environment. Medical teams take biometric readings and begin analyzing Thal physiology in earnest, searching for compatibility issues with human medical equipment and food stores. It's a race against time, with the moon's collapse advancing inexorably toward catastrophe. It is during these medical examinations that they make an unexpected discovery that tends to unravel everything. One of the selected Thal young ones is pregnant. The information is communicated to Sarah by Dr. Patel with a certain nervousness that suggests she understands the implications immediately. The young Thal female, whose name translates as Luminescence of Dawn, is approximately 3 months pregnant, carrying a child of her own species who will be born into the void between worlds, carrying the genetic legacy of an extinct civilization into an uncertain future. The Thal mother had not disclosed this information, understanding, perhaps, that it would exceed the acceptable parameters. Sarah understands immediately why the decision was made to conceal the pregnancy. An additional passenger, even a fetus not yet born, represents additional resource consumption. Sarah stands with Dr. Patel in the medical bay, staring at the scans that confirm the pregnancy, and she feels the weight of the universe pressing down on her. She faces a choice that defines the entire story. Does she report this fact to Captain Okonkwo, knowing it might result in Luminescence of Dawn being removed from the evacuation list? Does she follow protocol? Does she maintain the precise calculations that have been so carefully balanced? Or does she remain silent, allowing the secret to pass undetected, knowing it means she's being dishonest with her captain, but also knowing it means allowing a new generation to survive? She thinks of Emma, of the potential cut short. She thinks of the Thal child who will be born into a new world, carrying the genetic legacy of an extinct civilization forward. She thinks about what kind of universe she wants to live in, one where calculations always triumph over compassion, one where the margins of safety are more important than the possibility of life. Sarah reports the pregnancy to Captain Okonkwo, along with her recommendation that luminescence of dawn remain aboard. She makes her argument carefully but with passion. The fetus represents minimal additional resource consumption at present, she says, presenting the medical data. The birth, if it comes during the journey, represents not an additional passenger, but the continuation of a species on the brink of extinction. We came to space, Captain. We came because there's something in us that knows that life matters, that consciousness is precious, that beauty is worth protecting. We didn't come to hide behind calculations. Okonkwo approves the pregnancy, but only after requiring Sarah to sign official documentation stating that she full personal responsibility for any complications that arise. Sarah understands what this means with complete clarity. If resources run critically low because of the additional passenger, if luminescence of dawn or her unborn child becomes a liability, if any crew member suffers because of this decision, Sarah will be held accountable. She will carry that responsibility. She signs without hesitation, her name appearing in the official record as the person who advocated for the increased risk. The evacuation begins with lifeboat launches on day 9 of the countdown. The Thal are led aboard the Meridian in small groups, processed through the airlock, and guided to their retrofitted quarters in the modified laboratory. The children of both species watch each other with confusion and wonder. The human crew members, despite initial reservations, find themselves by the displacement occurring before them. These are not abstract concepts, not statistics or calculations. These are living beings with names and stories and attachment to the world they're leaving behind forever. They have faces, they have eyes, they are conscious and afraid and hoping. Sarah stands in the observation deck one final time before descent, watching the final Thal Elder being brought aboard. The Keeper of Histories, the blind one whose name carries meaning in harmonic tones that Sarah still cannot properly pronounce, is guided carefully by Dr. Foster and Lieutenant Torres. But she doesn't join the celebration in the command center. Instead, she's received an urgent message from the surface team. The Thal mother, she who remembers the first song, has declined evacuation. She is choosing to remain behind with the remaining Thal population, those who weren't selected for rescue, those who will die when the moon collapses. She wants to spend her final days with her people, to be present for the end of her civilization rather than exist as a survivor carrying unbearable guilt. Sarah returns to the planet's surface in the final rescue shuttle, against protocol and without authorization from Captain Okonkwo. She knows this violates direct orders, but she also knows she cannot leave without speaking one final time to the mother who sacrificed her own survival. She finds the Thal mother in the cavern, standing before a massive crystalline formation that clearly holds profound cultural significance. The formation sparkles with internal light, and Sarah understands that this is likely a sacred place, a location where the Thal have gathered for thousands of years to mark important moments. She who remembers the first song is not surprised to see Sarah, the alien woman, with those luminous eyes that seem to hold the weight of worlds and time and loss, places her hand over Sarah's with a gesture that transcends species. The touch is warm and gentle, and carries within it a communication that Sarah understands perfectly without words. No words are necessary. The Thal mother communicates a gratitude that transcends language, and then she speaks words in her harmonic language sounds like bells and music, and something that might be prayer. Dr. Foster's translator, still receiving the audio feed from Sarah's suit, later identifies these sounds as a benediction, something loosely translated as "May your descent into the void carry us toward distant suns. May you remember us in the light of strange stars. May our song echo in your hearts across the years." Sarah wants to tell her that she will remember, that she will make sure the human world knows what the Thal were, that their culture will not be erased even though their civilization will fall. But there's no time. The seismic readings from the surface show the situation deteriorating. The cavern itself is beginning to show signs of instability. Sarah embraces the alien woman, a gesture that might be misunderstood but which communicates what needs to be communicated. And then she returns to the lifeboat. It's the hardest thing she's ever done. As the Meridian begins its descent toward Earth's atmosphere, Sarah notices something that makes her pause and grip the edge of the viewing platform. One of the Thal young ones has approached the viewport and is pressing their face against it, watching as the moon recedes below them, and clouds begin to obscure the view. The child's eyes glow faintly in the dimming light, and there's wonder on their face, the look of someone seeing their new world for the first time, entirely conscious that never be the same again. This young Thal will grow up knowing only stories of the moon beneath the stars. This child will be the bridge between what was and what might be. Within minutes of the lifeboat disconnecting, massive rifts begin opening across the moon's surface. The seismic activity reaches critical levels, and the bioluminescent light that had painted the caverns begins to spill from fractures, like the lifeblood of a dying world. The ground simply splits open in massive crevasses, and the settlement that the humans had walked through, the crystalline spires and carefully crafted dwellings, begins to collapse into darkness. The Thal remaining on the surface, the 800 who were not evacuated, face their extinction in the light of the bioluminescence they created. It is simultaneously beautiful and tragic, a moment of profound cosmic violence that takes Sarah's breath away. She watches until the moon becomes uninhabitable, until the last traces of the civilization disappear into shadow and silence. The Meridian achieves orbit and begins the long journey back to Earth with its expanded passenger manifest of 31 Thal refugees. The first weeks are the most critical and tense. The Thal must adapt to human environments, to artificial light and recycled air and confined spaces of a starship that is nothing like the vast caverns they inhabited for thousands of years. Humans must overcome their initial fear of the alien passengers, must learn to see the Thal as refugees rather than curiosities or potential threats. Sarah becomes the primary cultural intermediary, working between the Thal elders and the human crew to facilitate understanding. She spends hours learning more of the Thal language, spending time with Luminescent Dawn and her developing pregnancy, building relationships with the Keeper of Histories and the artists and engineers who have been brought aboard. Small conflicts arise naturally from such intimate proximity. Disagreements over temperature regulation in shared spaces, because the Thal prefer cooler environments than humans. Confusion over human eating customs and the various tastes and textures of synthesized designed by human nutritionists who have no understanding of Thal palates. The Thal's profound discomfort with artificial light compared to the bioluminescence they produced naturally in their underground world. Lieutenant Torres, the security chief who initially opposed the evacuation plan, finds himself assigned to work closely with the Thal to maintain security protocols and help them understand ship procedures. Over time, a respect develops between him and the Keeper of Histories, a mutual recognition of individuals who have taken on the responsibility of protecting their people. They exchange stories, and Torres shares with the elderly Thal man the history of human space exploration, the risks and sacrifices that have brought humans to the stars. The Keeper listens and records the stories in his own tradition, adding human narratives to the tapestry of Thal cultural memory. Dr. Foster intensifies her study of Thal language and culture, creating comprehensive documentation that will fundamentally reshape human understanding of linguistic diversity and consciousness. She works with the younger Thal to develop a written language system that can preserve their harmonic communication in visual form. The Thal contribute to the effort eagerly, recognizing that they need to preserve their culture in new forms if it is to survive in a universe that is not their moon. But something unexpected and profound happens. The presence gradually transforms the ship's social dynamics. The initial gives way to curiosity, then familiarity, then something approaching friendship. The crew begins learning Thal music, those harmonic tones that can convey emotion and information simultaneously in ways that human language sometimes cannot. They teach the Thal about human art and literature, fascinated by narratives of exploration and discovery stories that now, ironically, are becoming the Thal's own story. Humans and Thal create together, sharing artistic visions and creating something genuinely new. Luminescence of Dawn gives birth safely on the ship's 3-month mark. The birth occurs in the medical bay with Dr. Patel and Dr. Foster attending, with Sarah present as well, because something in the journey has made her feel like family. The child is healthy, a perfect expression of Thal physiology, born in a laboratory aboard a human starship, representing the literal birth of a new generation, first member of the species to be born off the moon. The moment is celebrated by both humans and Thal, a recognition that life continues, that consciousness and culture will endure. Dr. Foster documents everything with meticulous care, creating a comprehensive record of Thal biology and culture that will fundamentally reshape human understanding of extraterrestrial life. The child's birth becomes a turning point and affirmation to the crew that their sacrifice and risk has created something living, something that will endure beyond this moment. The margins they accepted have been justified not by mathematics, but by the existence of this new life. Sarah spends time with the child, watching as it grows through the weeks of the journey, watching as it opens its luminous eyes and begins to perceive the world of the starship. She sees her daughter in its eyes, not in appearance but in the reflection of potential, that spark of consciousness that represents infinite possibility. She realizes that she's not seeing Emma's ghost, but rather the eternal pattern of new consciousness encountering existence. For the first time since Emma's death, Sarah doesn't feel the grief as a crushing force. Instead, it exists alongside something else, gratitude for the time she had with Emma, and recognition that futures have been created that wouldn't have existed without sacrifice. The resource calculations that Captain Okonkwo feared become less critical as the journey progresses. The ship's water recyclers perform better than expected, with Tanaka discovering a more efficient operational parameter that she implements after consulting with the ship's AI systems. The Thal's dietary requirements prove demanding than initially estimated, as their metabolism processes certain types of synthesized nutrients more efficiently than human physiology. The crew, unified by the shared mission of keeping new companions alive, becomes more efficient in resource management across all systems. What was predicted as barely sustainable becomes merely challenging. Captain Okonkwo calls Sarah to his quarters 3 months into the return journey. His command quarters are sparse, decorated with commendations and photographs from his decades of service. He tells her he's been reviewing the decision to admit the extra Thal passenger, the pregnant one. The official calculations suggest they're running only a 5% safety margin, much tighter than he's comfortable with, and he doesn't hide the fact this makes him anxious. But the decision stands. Okonkwo has made peace with the choice, and more than that, he tells Sarah he's proud of it in a way that he's proud of few decisions in his career. "We're explorers," he tells her, his voice carrying the weight of experience and conviction. "And when history judges us, and it will judge us, Sarah, it always does, I want it to be known that when we had the power to save a civilization, we didn't hide behind bureaucracy. We didn't let perfect be the enemy of good. We took the risk. We chose life. That's what exploration means. That's what being human means." The Thal elders begin sharing their culture more openly with the crew as the journey continues. They teach the humans about their ancient history, stories of migrations beneath the moon's surface thousands of years ago, legends of cosmic events, and philosophical principles that guided their civilization for millennia. Through these stories, Sarah and the crew begin to understand that much of what has been lost, the 800 Thal who died when the moon collapsed, cannot be recovered. But the 31 survivors are carrying something forward that will ensure the Thal identity continues to exist. Yet the resolution is not without complications and ambiguities. News from Earth Command arrives via quantum communication during the 5th month of the journey back, and it's complex and multifaceted. The discovery of the Thal has created unprecedented questions about human responsibility in the wider cosmos. The data and observations from the first contact mission have been analyzed by teams of scientists across Earth, and the implications are staggering. Some Earth governments welcome the Thal as living proof of extraterrestrial intelligence, as validation of decades of investment in space exploration. Other governments question whether bringing aliens to Earth represents an existential security risk, whether the Thal might carry unknown diseases, or whether their presence might create unforeseen diplomatic complications with other Earth nations. There are concerns about viral contamination, about cross-species infection, about the medical unknown. There are political concerns about what rights and status Thal will have in human society, about whether they will be treated as citizens or refugees or something else entirely. There are philosophical concerns about what first contact means for human religion and human understanding of our place in the universe. The communications from Earth are extensive and sometimes contradictory, revealing fractures in human society about how this discovery should be received. Sarah finds herself becoming an advocate not just for rescue, but for integration and dignity. She records messages for Earth governments, arguing passionately that the Thal must not be treated as curiosities or subjects of study, but as refugees who deserve the same rights and protections as any displaced population. She appears in media interviews conducted via quantum communication. Her face beamed to billions of humans across Earth, telling them about the Thal mother who chose to die with her people rather than live as a survivor. She argues for humanity's responsibility to those beyond their own species, for the cosmic principles that should guide how advanced species interact with less advanced ones. The pregnant Thal, luminescence of dawn, seeks out Sarah one evening in the observation deck. She places her hand on Sarah's face, a gesture that has become familiar over the months of shared space and shared purpose. Through the translator, she communicates something that moves Sarah to tears with its profound wisdom. Your child is among the stars now. When we lost our world, we thought we had lost everything. But in losing everything, we found you. We found that the universe contains kindness and sacrifice. We found that consciousness of one kind can recognize consciousness of another kind and choose compassion. My child carries your daughter's spirit forward in a way. We carry your child into the future in memory, and my child carries the legacy of your kindness into new worlds. In saving us, you have saved yourself. Sarah understands that this is true in ways she didn't anticipate when she first descended to the Thal caverns. In choosing to risk everything to save the Thal, in choosing to step outside the margins of safety she'd constructed around herself, she has saved more than just an alien civilization. She has saved the part of herself that had died along with Emma, the capacity to believe that life matters, to take risks for those who cannot save themselves. She has discovered that meaning can be created from tragedy. That connection can emerge from shared vulnerability. The Meridian enters Earth orbit after a 3-year return journey. But Sarah knows the ending of this story is just the beginning of something vastly larger and more complex. Earth has been preparing for the arrival of the Thal for nearly 3 years now, with governments and institutions working to create protocols for receiving an alien species. But nothing can fully prepare a world for the reality of extraterrestrial life arriving in orbit. News networks explode with live coverage of the Meridian in orbit, with the official announcement that humanity has successfully rescued an alien civilization from extinction. The Thal are humanity's first confirmed contact with an intelligent alien species, and they are not conquerors or competitors or invaders, but refugees, dependents, survivors. It complicates the narrative of first contact that humanity had imagined in countless stories and predictions. The Thal themselves emerge onto human world media carefully, presented to the global audience through the translation efforts Dr. Foster and the diplomacy of Captain Okonkwo. The images of the Thal, their luminous eyes, their skin shifting with color and emotion, their harmonic language played through speakers or audiences create a profound shift in human consciousness. The Thal are unmistakably alien, completely unlike humans in physiology and presentation, but they are also unmistakably conscious, emotional, intelligent. The gap between alien and other begins to narrow. Humans begin to see themselves in the Thal, not in biology, but in the universal patterns of consciousness experiencing existence. Sarah stands in the observation deck on the final night, before the official landing, watching Earth grow larger in the view screen. The Thal gather around her, standing with her in this liminal space between worlds, experiencing the approach to a new home that they have never seen. The older Thal, the keeper of histories whose name carries meaning in harmonic tones, places his aged hand on Sarah's shoulder. In my long life, longer than you can imagine, for my people measure time differently than yours, I believed we had seen the end of possibility. He communicates through the ever-present translator. I believed the future was set, that our decline was inevitable and unchanging. Your arrival changed that. My people will remember your name across generations, even if that name must be translated and retranslated until it becomes something entirely new. You are written into our story now. You are part of what we are. Sarah places her hand over his and finds that she has no adequate words. What can be said in a moment like this, when the entire trajectory of two civilizations has converged around choices by imperfect people trying to do the right thing? She settles for something simple. I'm honored to be part of your story. I'm honored to have helped. Sarah thinks about legacy and memory, about how the choices we make in moments of crisis ripple across time and circumstance in ways we cannot predict. She thinks about the mother she left behind on that dying moon, sacrificing herself so that her species might continue. She thinks about luminescence of dawn and the child born between worlds, who will grow up not pure or human, but something genuinely new, a child of two species, a bridge between civilizations. She thinks about the young ones watching Earth approach, trying to comprehend that this sphere of blue and green will be their home, the place where their species will rebuild. As the meridian begins its descent toward Earth's atmosphere, Sarah notices one of the Thal young ones has approached the viewport and is pressing their face against it, watching as clouds begin to obscure the view. The child's eyes glow faintly in the dimming light of entry, and there's wonder on the small face, the look of someone seeing something miraculous for the first time, entirely conscious that nothing will ever be the same again. This young Thal will grow up not in caverns beneath a moon, but on open worlds beneath open skies. They will grow up in a universe that is vast and dangerous and beautiful. They will grow up knowing that their species survived extinction through the sacrifice of others. The epilogue leaves the story profoundly open-ended, teasing futures yet unwritten. What will Earth's governments ultimately decide about the Thal's status and rights? Will they be granted asylum as refugees? Or will they be classified as something else, residents, citizens, temporary visitors? Will other Thal settlements be discovered elsewhere in the galaxy, hidden on other moons or distant planets? And if so, will they welcome or resent these survivors from the destroyed moon? How will the revelation of intelligent alien life reshape human philosophy, human religion, human understanding of consciousness, and what it means to be alive? Will Sarah's sacrifice of her personal grief, willingness to risk safety for unknown others, inspire a new generation of explorers and humanitarians? Or will human xenophobia eventually undermine the fragile peace that has been built? Most profoundly, how will the two species navigate the complex reality of living together, of building a genuine multispecies civilization rather than merely rescuing individuals? Will the birth of luminescence of dawn's child, the first Thal born among humans, create a new form of consciousness that bridges both species, or will it create new tensions and questions about identity and belonging? The story closes with Sarah and the Thal at the viewport, watching Earth rotate beneath them, a new world that is neither human nor alien but shared, contested, and utterly unpredictable. The future remains unwritten, and that uncertainty is both terrifying and beautiful. Sarah has given up her seat on the lifeboat of safety, and in doing so, has perhaps saved more than just a species. She may have saved humanity's future as well, the part of humanity that believes in second chances, in sacrifice, in the principle that consciousness, wherever it originates in the cosmos, is sacred and worthy of protection. In learning to save others, Sarah has discovered how to save herself.